So District 7 improper SPUI selection, PFI rejection. So what I'm going to do with this slide here is to show some of the context that that should constrain their selections. It should have a bearing on how they conduct themselves, how they perform their evaluation, how they go about making a selection for final construction. So I've talked about the purpose and need statement, and that should be number one. Does the alternative they've selected satisfy the project purpose and need? And in this case, the SPUI does not. And they can't say that it does. If they say it does, then that's just a flat out lie. They know the SPUI is operating at level surface F. I say it's operating at a severe level surface F, and they're going to say, well, it's F, but it's not so bad. It's just a few minutes of delay. That's not so bad. And that's what they show in their evaluation matrix, but that's a lie. Because what they should be showing is maximum delays. You can't even get to an average delay if you have oversaturated, congested movements. There is no average delay because the delay is additive over the course of the entire hour. There's no average. So they should be telling the public the maximum delays under those conditions. So you've got 20 minutes, over 20 minutes of delay. A level surface F is 80 seconds, is greater than 80 seconds of delay. I think it's greater than 80 seconds. It's either 80 seconds or more or over 80 seconds. I don't remember which, but so it's less than a minute and a half and you've got a level surface F. What is the standard? That's a level surface F. And they're looking at over 20 minutes. You'd never know it though from all their public information, their presentation, everything. That's because it's buried in their preliminary traffic analysis report. That's where you find the true extent. Well, not even the true extent. That's where you see the indication of just how severe the congestion is going to be, because in that document they show from their VSIM results a maximum queue of almost 2 miles, over 10,000 feet. And it's only that because they cut off the links. They don't extend the links any further. And they cut off the time period. Or they cut off the traffic at the end of the time period that they're analyzing. That's the end of the hour. So then they show, well, there's 40% of unmet demand. And that's 40% of the traffic they just ignore. So when it comes to the purpose and need of the project, the PFI satisfies it, the SPUI does not. And that should be important. It's not to the DOT. It's not to the MPO board, but that's the basis that they're going to use to fund the project. So they will commit fraud. They will lie to Federal Highways and say, yeah, this SPUI, it's going to eliminate congestion. So give us the 80% of the construction funding is what they're going to probably apply for from the federal government. So that's $80 million based on a lie. The FDOT level service policy. So FDOT has a target level service policy. And this is quoted from it. It is the department's intent to plan, design, and operate the state highway system at an acceptable level of service for the traveling public. The automobile mode level of service targets for the state highway system during peak travel hours are D in urbanized areas and C outside urbanized areas. So that's by policy. They're supposed to be achieving a level service D at this intersection by year 2045. Or through year 2045. The SPUI is F. The PFI is D. So the PFI satisfies the FDOT level service policy, and the SPUI does not. Then there's the FDOT mission statement and FDOT values. This is off their website. I just have to say that this is just propaganda. It's just a bunch of empty words. Based on FDOT District 7's conduct, I'd say that their mission is just to screw over the public and maximize their own benefit, their own rewards, at the expense of the public and taxpayers. I suppose you could say, well, if they were maximizing the benefit, then they would just get paid and not do anything at that intersection, right? The no build is the best option for them. That's the least amount of work for them to do. But the no build, one, means that this intersection continues to be a source of irritation for them because the public is pissed. That intersection has been congested long before 2012. Okay? They were supposed to open this project in 2020. That's what I responded to. When I proposed the PFI to them in 2016, their target year, opening year, 2020. Now it's 2030. They've been wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars studying this project that now they're going to build and open in 2020 or 2030. And then what happens when 2030 comes around is 2040 and then 2050. So what it amounts to is them cutting checks for themselves and pretending to work and pretending to do things. You know, pretending to work and work is those are two different things. So the FDOT mission is, to quote, this is their website, the department will provide a safe transportation system that ensures the mobility of people and goods, enhances economic prosperity, and preserves the quality of our environment and communities, end quote. Okay, the PFI does it, the SPUI does not. Now, the SPUI's bridge definitely enhances economic prosperity of Newport Richey and the Starkey Ranch. Okay, but at the expense of everybody that's stuck on US 41. You know, that's that unequal user benefit. The benefit is to the politicians and their buddies in Newport Richey and Port Richey and Starkey Ranch or Zephyr Hills, and screw everybody on 41. The PFI provides an equal user benefit. The SPUI does not. The PFI is going to better achieve the FDOT mission than the SPUI. Because the PFI is operating at level service D overall with no congested movements, the PFI preserves the quality of the environment and community better than the SPUI does. FDOT values. This is a joke. This is completely laughable based on my experience. Okay, integrity. We always do what is right. Respect. We value diversity, talent, and ideas. Man. Commitment. We do what we say we're going to do. Trust. We are open and fair. Customer driven. We listen to our customers. Okay. FDOT District 7, none of those things were done. None of those things. Okay, so District 7 failed to practice any of FDOT's values. By committing fraud, they've demonstrated they have no integrity. They have treated me and the PFI with disrespect, disdain, and a haughty indifference. You know, that they respect diversity and talent and ideas. Yeah, no, they don't. Their commitment is to themselves, not the public, not the taxpayers. The customers, quote unquote, District 7 listens to are a group of corrupt local politicians who occupy the seats of the MPO board. That's their customers. Not the public. Definitely not the taxpayers who pay their salaries. Screw them. Okay. So the intersection of US 41 at SR 54 is on the FDOT Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS. So this is a excerpt from FDOT Strategic Intermodal System Briefing 2023. Quote, "What is the SIS and why is it important? The Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS, is a statewide network of high-priority transportation facilities that seamlessly flows from one mode to the next." What they mean highway, rail, etc., with the goal of providing the highest degree of mobility for people and goods traveling throughout Florida. The SIS plays a vital role in achieving Florida's goal of enhancing economic competitiveness and improving the quality of life for its citizens and visitors. The SIS was established in Florida statute to focus resources on transportation facilities of statewide and interregional significance. End quote. And I'm emphasizing here the goal of providing the highest degree of mobility for people and goods traveling throughout Florida. So the PFI achieves that, and the SPUI does not. The PFI will operate at a level service D overall, no failing movements, no congestion. The SPUI, the bridge on 54, does provide the highest level of service, A, but US 41 will be a parking lot at a level service F. So it does not accomplish this objective as an SIS facility. This is an excerpt from Florida statutes 339.61. Quote, "The legislature declares that the designation of a strategic intermodal system composed of facilities and services of statewide and interregional significance will efficiently serve the mobility needs of Florida citizens, businesses, and visitors." End quote. And from Florida Statutes 339.135, quote, "The department shall allocate at least 50% of any new discretionary highway capacity funds to the Florida Strategic Intermodal System created pursuant to Section 339.61, end quote. And I emphasize the word capacity. Capacity funds, not economic development funds, capacity funds. Again, what's the motive of trying to package this project as a capacity project when in reality it's an economic development project? Well, to get more funding. And this is a quote from the FDOT Level Service Handbook. Quote, "The motorized vehicle mode level service targets for the SHS state highway system during peak travel hours, level service D in urbanized areas," end quote. So just repeating that from the level of service policy of FDOT is a level service D, is what they're supposedly trying to achieve. And this is an SIS facility, meaning that the motivation to achieve a level service D is even greater. But none of that matters to District 7 or the Pasco MPO board. So this is a graphic from the FDOT SIS Atlas, and it shows in the area of the intersection what SIS facilities are on the system, and the intersection is here. It shows 597 intersecting with State Route 54. I believe this is the Sunshine Parkway, and this, I'm not sure, this is probably I-75 over here. So this is the intersection. 597 is Dale Mabry Highway, but what it doesn't show in this graphic is that from the intersection of Dale Mabry to SR 54, it is US 41. So the south leg of this intersection of US 41 is part of the SIS system. It is an SIS facility itself. It's not just 54. And when I first started this, with this effort in 2016, when I submitted my PFI concept proposal, this western segment of State Route 54 was not included. So this was added since, very likely because I was making a point of saying that the SIS is the south and east legs of the intersection, because that favors the PFI. The PFI treats all legs of the intersection equally, and it's at level service D, meaning that as a SIS facility, it's more favored by the PFI, that the PFI makes more sense. Then all of a sudden, oh, well, they've added this leg here to connect 54 west. I'm sure that they tried to eliminate the south leg so that they could show it as an east-west corridor, which would then let them say, well, obviously it needs to be a freeway, because it's SIS and it's only 54. But that's not the case. The south leg is still part of the SIS going down Dale Mabry. And because that is the case, the bridge with the congestion on 41, I say, does not satisfy the SIS requirement that District 7 and Pasco MPO board happily ignore. So yes, 3 legs of the intersection are on the FDOT-SIS. The purpose and need, again, is to meet future traffic, and SIS is intended to be an investment for capacity. So the SPUI does not satisfy any of this. The SIS is a high priority facility with the purpose of achieving the highest degree of mobility for people and goods traveling throughout Florida. So not just people using 54, but people using 41 too. The PFI meets the SIS target level service D on all 3 legs. The SPUI fails to meet the SIS target level service D with a severe level service F on the 41 south leg, with maximum vehicle queues extending through the Dale Mabry intersection well before design year 2045. So there'll be traffic queues in the PM. This is when commuters are going home in the evening. At the SPUI signal, traffic will queue back through the Dale Mabry intersection. FDOT doesn't care. FDOT doesn't care about that at all. And neither does the MPO board. Remember, ka-ching, That's their agenda. Not serving the public, not serving the taxpayers, but serving themselves, and using their official positions to accomplish that. The SPUI unequal versus PFI equal user benefit between 41 and 54. So whether a bridge is built over 41 as proposed or with 41 over 54, which they've considered but they dismissed as being not feasible, and then FDOT says, hey, they want to look at that again maybe in their February 2023 MPO presentation. Well, maybe we should take 41 over 54. Well, you already evaluated that and dismissed it. But in bureaucratic, the bureaucratic mindset is dig holes, fill them again, dig holes, fill them again, and that's what they call work. That's working. So the SPUI alternative produces an unequal user benefit of one route over the other disproportionately, favoring the bridge users, which operates at a level service A, while disadvantaging non-bridge users at the signal with a level service F. The PFI alternative treats both routes equally with a level service D and no failing movements. Note, 70% of the traffic at the junction will go through the SPUI signal on US 41, while only 30% will use the bridge, making this disparity even greater. This table that I've included here shows maximum delay in minutes in the design year 2045 and maximum Q in miles for the AM and PM periods. So under delay for the SPUI, the maximum delay, this is from my vSIM modeling using their signal timing for the SPUI signal and their design year peak hour traffic that I then model in vSIM. They didn't do it. They did it, but they did not correct for unmet demand. I'll talk about that more later, but it's something they should have done. So their delay figures are just grossly underreporting the amount of actual delay that vSIM shows will be experienced. So this is from my model using their volumes, their signal, and their design of the SPUI. So I have southbound on 41 in the AM almost 22 minutes of maximum delay versus the PFI is about a minute. Northbound in the morning is over 3 minutes of delay versus a minute. On the ramps, eastbound 9 minutes versus a minute, westbound 11 minutes versus a minute. And that's because there's a large volume of traffic on 54 that's heading south in the morning to Tampa. So they're turning left and they're turning right. The westbound turning right. The westbound turning left and the eastbound turning right. So they're getting congested on the ramp too. In the PM, I have 22 minutes and 21 minutes southbound and northbound respectively at the SPUI signal, and a couple of minutes of delay on the eastbound ramp, over a minute of delay on the westbound ramp. So keep in mind level service F, which I have the table here showing the different levels of service by average vehicle delay, or just say vehicle delay. If it's over 80 seconds, that's considered level service F. So in terms of maximum delay, the SPUI has one movement in the PM that is a level service E, and all the rest are F. But you can see the bridge, no delay, no delay, no delay. It's all 0. Then in terms of Q, you can see that the SPUI signal cues back almost 3 miles in the morning, southbound on 41, and in the PM, 2 miles, basically 2 miles both directions. Whereas at the PFI, it's 1/10 of a mile maximum, all directions. So by unequal user benefit, it's pretty clear that the SPUI really disadvantages the people on 41, that they pay a price so that the people on the bridge don't get delayed at all. Whereas at the PFI, everybody experiences the same amount of delay, and the amount that they experience is not that much, if it's less than a minute. So with these next slides, I'm going to go over what I consider to be the constraints on FDOT and the MPO with respect to selecting their final build alternative. Okay, so I'm just calling this a legal, procedural, and ethical rule-based framework, because there's a whole lot of rules that come into play that they're supposed to follow. They don't, because they don't have to. All those rules are just written on paper. They have sovereign immunity. They get to do whatever they want. Those rules, the rules, you know, it's just age-old thing. Rules are for peasants and the, you know, the aristocracy. They exempt themselves from their own rules, right? That's the mindset of these people. But they do exist. The rules do exist. They just need to be enforced. The question is, will they be enforced? I'd say they won't be. So this is the legal, procedural, and ethical rule-based framework governing FDOT alternatives development, evaluation, and final selection. So state DOTs and regional MPOs don't get to construct whatever the hell they want. In theory. In theory. So given a competent and honest reading of the law, they can't select their final build alternative for highway construction arbitrarily, subjectively, and certainly not to benefit themselves at the expense of the public and taxpayers. You would think. You know, the highway system does not exist for FDOT bureaucrats to enrich themselves or to just show up for work and get paid to do what's best for them, not for the public, not for the taxpayers. It's not supposed to exist for that purpose. It's also not supposed to exist for the purpose of enriching corrupt local politicians. Right? It's supposed to exist by all of these things that FDOT tells us in their mission statement, their values, all that stuff. The highway system is supposed to benefit the public. And it's supposed to, you know, does it benefit taxpayers? Well, the taxpayers are the public. But so there's a competing interest here that they have to balance between taxpayers. What taxpayers want is the cheapest transportation system possible, obviously. The people want the most efficient and safest transportation system possible that also has the least impacts, environmental impacts and community impacts. So that's the objectives of the people, and the taxpayers want the system to be as cheap as possible. But the taxpayers and the people really are one and the same for the most part. So it's achieve all of those objectives: efficiency, safety, minimal impacts, but try to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. Okay, the PFI achieves all of that, and the SPUI does not. So what that means is that the decision to build the SPUI is in the interests of the decision makers, not in the interest of the people the project's supposed to serve. So they're legally required to justify their selection of final build alternative, and that justification per FHWA must be based on a rigorous objective engineering and analysis, devoting substantial treatment to each alternative considered in detail. I mean, that's straight from the Federal Highways, which is itself from NEPA, is the interpretation of the NEPA law. Both agencies knowingly and intentionally did none of this for the project, while further still, in violation of Florida statutes, did knowingly and intentionally commit fraud by performing or allowing to be performed incorrect engineering and analysis of the alternatives. Okay, so they're choosing to build the SPUI because that's in their best interest to do so, and to justify it, they commit fraud, and thereby presented false conclusions to the public based on said fraudulent engineering and analysis. Of course, laws have to be enforced to make them adhere, but they won't be. Laws meant to protect the public and taxpayers against government predation are in practice suggestions only. That's the way I see it. The laws that are on the books are meaningless, are empty if they're not enforced. And the government does not enforce laws against itself. Or I mean, it's a rare thing. Because if they enforce the laws that are imposed on them, how many people in government would actually not be put in jail? I mean, I'm not talking about the rank and file. I'm not talking about the people in the bureaucracy that are actually may be trying to do a good job. I'm talking about at the upper levels, the leadership, the management levels, the decision makers. How many of them would not end up in jail if they actually enforce the laws that these people are supposed to comply with? I don't know that there would be that many. So for this project, given FHWA funding, the Florida DOT and MPO are constrained by the following rule-based framework. Legal requirements. The U.S. National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, or NEPA. The U.S. False Claims Act. It makes it illegal for government officials to lie to the public, presumably, to prepare false documents. Florida statutes 838.022 and 477.033 against official and engineering fraud or misconduct, respectively. The Florida Board of Professional Engineers, rules of responsibility. So there are legal requirements that engineers have to meet in the state of Florida. FDOT consultant contract and scope of services. So these are legal documents. They enter into a contract with the consultant who's going to do the work on the study. It's a two-way contract. It binds both parties. And that contract, I say, also means that the public and the taxpayers are incidental third-party beneficiaries of that contract. because FDOT presumably is acting in their interest. So the whole purpose of the study is not for FDOT's benefit, but is for the public's benefit, for the taxpayers' benefit. FDOT doesn't see it that way. FDOT sees themselves as the primary beneficiary of the contract. Right? They're the ones that benefit. Not the public, not the taxpayers. But I see it differently. They're acting as an agent of the public and the taxpayers. And it's a two-way contract. If you read the text of the contract, it says that both parties will abide by the law, both parties will abide by all applicable regulations, policies, and the PD&E manual. They don't. They just ignore it at will, but that's what they're supposed to do. The purpose and needs statement is a legal element of the study. The purpose and needs statement is what they use to justify spending, in this case, $222 million. Procedural requirements. The FDOT targets of level of service policy. Okay, they ignore this. It's a joke to them. That's my impression. In District 7, that policy is a joke to them. Whatever. It's like the U.S. Constitution is a joke to Congress. They just like Pelosi just laughs at the U.S. Constitution. Well, that's what FDOT does. They laugh at their own level of service target policy. FDOT Preliminary Development and Environment Manual. So that the PD&E manual is supposedly their procedures and policies for complying with NEPA. Okay, again, they just ignore it at will. All other applicable FDOT design and analysis manuals and standards, such as the FDOT Traffic Analysis Handbook, the FDOT Green Book, FDOT Design Manual. I mean, there are a number of manuals and handbooks that they are also supposed to follow. Traffic analysis software, best practices, and respective user manuals. So in this case, it's Synchro and VSIM. So Synchro is based on the highway capacity manual, highway capacity software. I mean, it kind of follows the same. It's basically the same methodology that goes into Synchro, and it's a black box basically, but it only works for traditional, for the most part, traditional like intersection types, and it has its own limitations that are, it's clearly stated in the manual. So oversaturated conditions, Synchro says it's not going to give a valid answer. That doesn't stop FDOT from using it. They do, which is fraud. And then VSIM. And both of these softwares are explained as to how they're to be used in the FDOT Traffic Analysis Handbook. Ethical requirements. The FDOT mission statement. Why have one if you're just going to ignore it? The FDOT value statement. So with respect to NEPA, this is an excerpt from the Federal Highways NEPA Transportation Decision Making page. Quote, the identification, consideration, and analysis of alternatives are key to the NEPA process and goal of objective decision making. Consideration of alternatives leads to a solution that satisfies the transportation need and protects environmental and community resources. The Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ, refers to the alternatives analysis section as the heart of the EIS. EIS is the Environmental Impact Statement. and requires agencies to, see, note that, requires agencies. I mean, it's just words, empty words. Because, requiring them to do it only goes as far as they are going to be willing to enforce, which they don't. So it requires agencies to rigorously explore and objectively evaluate all reasonable alternatives, and for alternatives which were eliminated from detailed study, briefly discuss the reasons for their having been eliminated. Devote substantial treatment to each alternative considered in detail, including the proposed actions, so that reviewers may evaluate their comparative merits. End quote. 40 CFR 1502.14. So none of this was done. FDOT was supposed to do a feasibility study of the PFI, and they did not study the feasibility of the PFI. They did a crap design, crap signalization, and then said, gosh, it doesn't work very well. I guess we better build the SPUI. To do a proper feasibility study, first off, they need to design it correctly, signalize it correctly, which meant following my specifications. And then the concerns that they have subjected to an engineering analysis. Is the PFI confusing? Well, maybe it is. Okay. Then what tools are available to assess that? See, devote substantial treatment to each alternative considered in detail. When they added the PFI to their feasibility study, that obligated them to devote substantial treatment to the PFI. The PFI is new, hasn't been built. Okay, that means you have to put in more effort to evaluate it than the SPUI. That obligates FDOT to do that. They did nothing of the sort. The tools available. FHWA's driver simulator could have been used. It was used for the DDI in Missouri, the first one that was built. That would tell you whether or not, objectively, if the PFI is confusing for drivers. And what does it even mean to be confusing? Roundabouts are confusing, but they're being built all over the place. How much confusion? Anyway, I'll talk more about that later, but they didn't do any of this. So District 7 didn't perform a rigorous, objective, detailed evaluation of the PFI, nor did they devote substantial treatment. They did the opposite. Yeah, they did none of that. None of it. I have 7 years of email correspondence between these agencies and me proving they failed to comply with NEPA. By rigorous, I understand to mean good faith, competent, and comprehensive design and analysis. And by objectively, I understand to mean honest and without prejudice. These accused officials at District 7 MPO knowingly and intentionally acted in bad faith, incompetently, negligently, dishonestly, and prejudicially in their respective evaluation of the alternatives and false claims used to justify the SPUI over the PFI. Secretary Gwynn and the MPO board did knowingly and intentionally subvert NEPA and the FDOT PD&E process in service of their own selfish interests with flagrant disregard of their fiduciary duty to act in the public interest and causing significant financial harm to the taxpayers and to me. The PD&E process is very by the numbers, with objective criteria that are used to evaluate the relative quality of alternatives. Okay, it's supposed to be an objective process, and it really is by the numbers. Level of service, by the numbers. Even safety can be evaluated in an objective manner. Okay, can be done. They didn't do it, but it can be done. Should be done. All of the factors that go into making a selection can have engineering analysis behind them. Impacts, cost estimates. They know what it takes to build the project, so they know what kind of disruption the construction involves. They know about work zone safety. All of those factors could be included, evaluated, and there would be an engineering basis for them. But what engineering they did employ was wrong. I suspect FDOT does this routinely so that they get to build the projects that they want. They can build the projects in their interest, not alternatives that best serve the public or taxpayer interests. So this is one project. And it just so happens this particular project I've been very involved in. Now there are other projects that I've had involvement with where I see a similar pattern. My guess is this is culture at FDOT. This is how they operate. This is how they roll. Screw the public. Screw the taxpayers. Do what's in their best interest or their buddies. Corrupt local politicians. Do what they want. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It seems FDOT District 7 has spent the last 11 years and millions of tax dollars on consultant fees performing the US 41 at SR 54 intersection PD&E study, for which they'd already made their build alternative selection even before the study began, and were completely unwilling to entertain another alternative no matter how much better. So they had already decided on the SPUI, and the MPO board had already decided on the SPUI. Everything that followed over those 11 years was theater. Just theater and manipulation. All the while the public, the people who use that intersection, are stuck in congestion, wondering when it's going to get fixed. And as I've said, the PFI could have been opened by latest 2022. Should have been. And then the people would be using that intersection and not getting delayed, not having the crashes that go with it. Their quality of life would be much better today if these politicians and FDOT would just be honest and do their jobs. Just do their damn job in a competent way. No, couldn't have that. So here I have an excerpt from the consultant contract, and this is scope of services attachment to that contract for the feasibility study that began in, well, actually this is from the original contract. This is the contract that was executed October 26, 2011. So yeah, the PDD began in probably early 2012. But so I'm going to read from this excerpt here. Quote, "The purpose of this exhibit is to describe the scope of work and the responsibilities of the consultant and the department in connection with the preliminary engineering, conceptual design, and environmental studies necessary to comply with department procedures and to obtain Federal Highway Administration location and design concept acceptance of proposed improvements to this transportation facility." So that's what I'm referring to with the False Claims Act. I'm not quite sure if it applies now or will apply after the FDOT goes to FHWA for approval of the project. In fact, I'm not even sure that they have to seek. I'm not sure if they seek approval anyway, or if it's just for federal funding because of US 41. That's US route. I don't know. It's a bit murky to me, the distinctions between what is federal highways responsibility, what is the state DOT's responsibility with respect to US routes and interstate. But what this is indicating is that according to this contract that FDOT has entered into with their consultant, that they're going to comply with federal highway requirement anyway. So under that requirement, I think the U.S. False Claims Act should still apply. But again, I'm not an attorney. It's just my opinion. But to go on, the project development process shall follow the department's publication titled Project Development and Environment Manual and all subsequent revisions. Throughout the scope of services portion of this consultant contract, the publication will be referred to as the PD&E Manual. All tasks identified in the scope of work will be done in accordance with the department's PD&E Manual unless otherwise stated. The PD&E Manual incorporates all the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, federal law and executive orders, applicable federal regulations included in the Federal Highway Administration Federal Aid Policy Guide, and applicable state laws and regulations including Chapter 339.155 of the Florida statutes. The project documentation prepared by the consultant in accordance with the PD&E Manual shall therefore comply with all applicable state and federal laws, executive orders, and regulations. So what this is saying is that FDOT doesn't just get to arbitrarily build whatever the hell they want. That the District 7, Secretary Gwynn, doesn't get to walk into the office one day and say, you know, I like the SPUI, and I don't care for this PFI, newfangled PFI thing, so let's just build the SPUI. He doesn't get to sit in his office and get a call from an MPO board member saying, hey, look, Secretary Gwynn, you know, we don't really want this PFI thing because we want to turn this road into a freeway one day, so just pick the SPUI, okay? See, they don't get to do that. You know, they're supposed to follow the law. They're supposed to follow their own procedures. They're supposed to follow. This is a contract that they've entered into with the consultant, and I contend that the public and taxpayers are incidental third-party beneficiaries to this contract. Every contract that the government enters into with a consultant, U.S. government, state government, state DOTs, local governments, the public and taxpayers are incidental third-party beneficiaries to every contract the government enters. The government cannot be the primary beneficiary of their own contracts because they exist to serve the public interest and the taxpayers. And if they're going to say, oh, no, that's not true. We exist for our own sake. And you guys, you know, the peasants can go away. You know, the serfs, you guys are serfs. Okay? I mean, that would be the implication of the government being beneficiaries to their own contract at the exclusion of the public and taxpayers. That they get to do whatever the hell they want, and the people who pay their salaries, the people who they presumably serve, can just go screw themselves. So, you know, it can't work that way. If it does work that way, I didn't get the memo. Okay, I didn't get that memo. So this is a two-way contract that I say binds both FDOT, District 7, and their consultants to comply with NEPA, comply with the PD&E manual, all associated laws, regulations, policies, and procedures, which creates a constraining framework around what they do and what decisions they can make. Okay? They cannot just arbitrarily decide, hey, I just feel like building a SPUI here, so that's what we're going to do. And then everything that follows to justify the SPUI is just theater. It's just for show. They can't do that. Or I should say they can do that, but only to the extent that they're allowed to do that. And they are allowed to do that because they do that on all their projects, or certainly any project that has any political significance. I mean, if we're talking about a stop sign out in the middle of nowhere, then I'm sure that they follow their policies and procedures to a T. I mean, I guess. I don't know. But when there's stakes, there's high stakes projects like this one, then the policies, the procedures, the laws, they just go out the window. Okay, so I'm accusing both the District 7 and their consultants, RSNH and AECOM, of violating the terms of this contract. And I'm stating that I am a party to this contract. Okay, when they added the PFI as an alternative, that made me a beneficiary to this contract. Because if the SPUI is selected as the final build alternative, I get $57 million. That makes me a beneficiary to this contract. The contract between FDOT and the consultant stipulates that the consultant in the department will comply with the FDOT P&D manual, which again, that is the Florida Department of Transportation's means of complying with NEPA is by following their P&D manual and all associated laws, regulations, and policies. Both parties failed to do this. I further assert that this contract isn't just between FDOT and their consultant, but also includes the public taxpayers and me as third-party beneficiaries. That FDOT can't be the beneficiary of the contract. I mean, they are, but only to the extent that they are acting as an agent of the public and the taxpayers. That ultimately it's the public and taxpayers who are the beneficiaries of this contract. So if they fail to perform, it's not like with a corporation. A corporation can enter into a one-sided contract, or a private company. A private company can enter into a one-sided contract like an employment contract where everything is in their favor. I'm sure that there are labor laws that may make it not quite that black and white, but it's possible for private parties to enter into one-sided contracts. But I say it's not possible for the DOT to enter into a one-sided contract. And this contract is definitely not one-sided, where it just favors the DOT and not the consultant. It's binding both the DOT and the consultant to comply with FDOT's PD&E manual. By failing to perform on the contract, the public and taxpayers via their elected representatives should hold the FDOT and the consultant in breach of contract, or the courts, right? We're all, okay, Parsons, you've been wronged by these people. They're not following their contract. You claim to be a beneficiary. We'll take them to court. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. One, they have sovereign immunity. Two, I can't afford to because it's hugely expensive, especially suing the state. The state has an army of attorneys to represent itself. The courts have a clear conflict of interest when it comes to representing, or when it comes to make a decision that involves a state, because the courts themselves the judges are employees of the state. Clear conflict of interest. It's just intrinsic to the court system of the United States when it comes to suing the state. Of course, you'll find exceptions. You'll find instances where the court rules in favor of somebody who feels they've been harmed by the state. My guess is that almost all those exceptions are high profile, where it would, if the court rules otherwise, there would be a huge outrage mob. So they politically, my point, I guess, is that the courts, when they make a judgment against the state, it's going to be a political judgment, not a matter of justice. They weigh, what's the political risk, what's the political downsides of deciding, in favor of the plaintiff suing the state, right? And if it's not, it really isn't going to be a matter of whether the plaintiff is justified if the plaintiff has been harmed, unless it's, like I say, unless it's some high profile, obvious case of state wrongdoing. So and probably for that reason and others, no attorney will represent me on a contingency fee basis. I mean, I can't blame them. So it's not going to happen. Politicians, the courts, they represent their own interests over the public's and the taxpayers' interests. That's what they do. And in the case of suing the state of Florida, for instance, well, they have sovereign immunity. And what sovereign immunity means, as I understand it, you can't sue them. I mean, literally, you cannot sue the state unless they waive their sovereign immunity, unless they give you permission to sue them. Right? How great would that be? You accidentally ding your neighbor's car backing out of your driveway, and your neighbor says, "Hey, look, you've damaged my car," and you go, "Oh well," shrug your shoulders, kind of like what the DOT does to me. Just shrug your shoulders and go, "Oh well," and then your neighbor says, "Okay, well, I'm going to sue you," and then the courts say, "No. You can't sue your neighbor unless he gives you permission to sue him." Yeah, imagine how nice it would be if no one could sue you unless you give them permission to sue you. How many times do you think you're going to get sued? Right? So that's how the state has set themselves up in this country to protect themselves from their own wrongdoing. Sovereign immunity. But even if they waive their sovereign immunity, and even if a court actually cared about justice and ruled in my favor, and a jury awarded me my $57 million plus the attorney fees, even if that happened, in the state of Florida, if the damages exceed $300,000, as I understand it, if the damages exceed $300,000, only by an act of state legislature and signature of the governor would the award be paid. So they could award it to you. The jury could say, "Yeah, they screwed you over. You deserve millions of dollars." Great. Okay, but you don't get any of that money unless the legislature literally passes a law to pay you, and the governor literally signs it into law before you see any money. So anyone who would say, "Well, gee, Greg, why don't you just sue the state?" I mean, no. That's not a viable option. And of course, these people who work for FDOT who sit on the MPO board, they know this. They know this. They know I can't sue them. It's, if I say, hey, look, I'm going to sue you, which I suggested that I would do that at one time because I was so frustrated and angry with them in the situation. I said, hey, look, you guys are causing me a lot of harm. This is millions of dollars. I may seek legal counsel. And I didn't know at the time that was a completely empty threat. Totally empty threat to try to sue them. I've since learned. So I further assert that I am a party to this contract even though I didn't sign it. Because when they added the PFI as an alternative to the PD&E study via this contract, District 7 then made me a third-party beneficiary to the contract. That in addition to my being harmed by District 7 and the Pasco MPO as a result of their official misconduct and malfeasance, I've also been harmed by FDOT and their consultants' failure to execute the terms of the consultant contract as a third-party beneficiary to that contract. So I'm just saying that yes, their actions caused me harm, but also failure to perform on this contract is causing me harm too. I'm sure any one of a million lawyers would tell me how I'm wrong and that I should leave the lawyering to lawyers. Maybe so. But since I'm just a peasant, remember, if you're not one of them, you're a peasant. And honestly, I don't care how much money you have. If you don't play their game, you're a peasant to them. Just look how Trump's been treated. I mean, Trump probably thought of himself as being in the club, until he didn't, follow the script. And the next thing he knows, he's a peasant like everybody else. Maybe so, but since I'm just a peasant who can't afford an attorney and none will talk to me on this issue without a fat fee, I'm left to my own devices, left to do what I can do myself. So what does Google Bard have to say about this? So I prompt Google Bard. So Google Bard is the Google's AI chat service, large language model that you can query, ask it whatever. It's far from perfect, but I asked it this question to see what it would say. Okay, so why was the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 enacted? NEPA the Bard's response is that NEPA was enacted in response to growing public concern about the environment. The act established a national policy for the environment and required federal agencies to assess the environmental impacts of their proposed actions. The goals of NEPA are to promote productive and enjoyable harmony between man and his environment. All right, so comparing the SPUI and the PFI better accomplishes that in every way. The PFI has better air quality, less noise, less impacts, physical impacts to floodplain and wetlands. In every way, the PFI is better with respect to impacting the environment. Prevent or eliminate damage to the environment and biosphere. Stimulate the health and welfare of man. Well, again, the PFI serves that purpose better than the SPUI. Enrich the understanding of the ecological systems and natural resources important to the nation. NEPA has been credited with helping to improve environmental protection in the U.S. The act has been used to prevent or mitigate environmental damage from a wide range of projects, including highways, dams, power plants, oil and gas pipelines. NEPA has also helped to raise public awareness of environmental issues and to promote sustainable development. Here are some examples of how NEPA has been used to protect the environment. So, But the thing is, what were they doing? What were the DOTs doing that would necessitate something like NEPA? Well, they're building projects with, say, with an arbitrary consideration over the impacts those projects have. And why would they do that? To serve their own interest and the interests of corrupt politicians. That's why they do it. They just plow through neighborhoods, plow through natural, areas, natural environments without a concern. And why not? So they had to enact a law to restrain this. But what I've experienced is that law is just words on paper. So NEPA is a landmark environmental law that has helped protect the environment in the U.S. The act has been used to prevent or mitigate environmental damage from a wide range of projects. Well, I guess. So another prompt. Does NEPA require that when federal funds are used, the state or local agencies must 1. Evaluate multiple alternatives, 2. Select the alternative that maximizes level of service and safety while minimizing environmental and community impacts? Bard's response, yes. NEPA does require that when federal funds are used, state or local agencies must evaluate multiple alternatives and select the alternative that maximizes level of service and safety while minimizing environmental and community impacts. Well, not according to FDOT. This requirement is found in Section 102(2)(e) of NEPA, which states that the federal agencies must study, develop, and describe alternative courses of action in any proposal which involves unresolved conflicts concerning alternative uses of available resources. Now, the purpose of this requirement is to ensure that federal agencies consider all the potential environmental and social impacts of a proposed project before making a decision about whether to proceed. By evaluating multiple alternatives, agencies can identify the option that is most likely to have the least environmental and social impact. Well, in this project, they just added alternatives just to say that they added alternatives with no intention of actually evaluating them in an honest, competent way, in an objective way. In addition to evaluating multiple alternatives, NEPA also requires agencies to consider the no-action alternative. The no-action alternative is the option of not proceeding with the proposed project at all. Agencies must consider the no-action alternative even if it isn't their preferred option. Well, I mean, to some extent, they've already decided that the no-action alternative is okay because they've been dragging their feet for years. I mean, they finally got to a preferred alternative, but now that preferred alternative won't open until 2030 if they don't delay it even more. So in a way, the no build seems to be the alternative that's won out after they've spent millions of dollars on consultant fees and their own time. I mean, they have to have time to put on their time card. The evaluation of multiple alternatives and the consideration of the no-action alternative are two of the most important requirements of NEPA. These requirements help to ensure that federal agencies make informed decisions about whether to proceed with proposed projects and that they consider the potential environmental and social impacts of those projects. Now, it says federal agencies, but it applies to state agencies too. Here are some additional things to keep in mind about the NEPA requirement to evaluate multiple alternatives. The alternatives must be reasonable and feasible. Well, is the PFI reasonable? Well, it is reasonable unless you think that the fact that it's new and hasn't been built yet is unreasonable. But if that's unreasonable, then then forget having new projects, new types of projects. I mean, if new is unreasonable, then forget progress, right? I mean, that's just completely anti-progress. If we're going to say just by the virtue of the fact it's new and hasn't been built is a reason to not build it. I say that's not justification. That the whole point of a feasibility study is to determine if it's feasible. Okay? There is uncertainty and risk that comes with doing something new. But if we don't do that, then we never have anything new. Now, you could get into a philosophical debate over whether, well, is that something the government should be doing? Is it in the public interest for the government to build something new, no matter how good it looks on paper, no matter how much the public benefits, no matter how much money it saves? The fact that it's new means they shouldn't do it? That they're allowed to say no to it because it's new? I say no. That's not justification. That they have engineers, they have experience in theory, they know what they're doing. The PFI doesn't have any elements to it that are exotic or are themselves new technology. It doesn't involve any new technology at all. It's just rearranging standard roadway elements into a novel configuration. So calling it new is itself not really that true, because it's according to the patent, it's an incremental improvement on what is already being done. And they didn't do a feasibility study. They called it a feasibility study, but they didn't actually study the PFI's feasibility. The alternatives must be evaluated at a comparable level of detail. Well, I say that they violated that provision when they had the Vision 5456 do a planning level evaluation of the PFI. The DOT, as in the course of doing a PD&E study, they have to screen alternatives. But the screening process is not meant to be one where they just eliminate the designs they don't want to do, and the ones they do want to do pass the screening test. The screening test is to decide whether or not a design is feasible and suitable for the location. If it is, then it should go into detailed design. Into the preliminary design stage. Screening is not, hey, we don't like those, so let's make sure that they don't pass the screening, but we like this one, so it'll pass. That's not what the screening is intended to do. The alternatives must be compared to the no action alternative, which they do. So they do that. They carry the no build through. The evaluation of alternatives must be documented in the environmental impact statement, which in this case is a categorical exclusion type 2. That's their environmental document. The NEPA requirement to evaluate multiple alternatives is an important tool for protecting the environment and ensuring that federal agencies make informed decisions about proposed projects. But they actually have to do that. They need to actually do that, not just say they did it. This requirement helps to ensure that the best possible decisions are made about whether to proceed with a project and that the environmental and social impacts of the project are minimized. Well, with the SPUI, they're maximizing those impacts. They're not minimizing them, they're maximizing them. I suppose they could have compared the SPUI to a system interchange. Of course, a system interchange would not be appropriate because a system interchange is connecting two freeways together. But why should that stop them? Why not? If someone were to say, hey, look, those roads are not classified as freeways, they just look at you dumbly, stupidly, until you get tired of talking to them, and then they just walk away. somebody at Federal Highways might say, hey, wait a second, this isn't appropriate to include a system interchange here. I say might. So another prompt to BARD. Does NEPA require that when evaluating alternatives, state or local agency do so in competent, comprehensive, and objective manner? BARD's response, yes, NEPA requires that when evaluating alternatives, the state or local agency do so in a competent, comprehensive, and objective manner. This means that the agency must consider all reasonable alternatives, including the no action, evaluate the alternatives in a thorough and unbiased manner, provide a reasoned explanation for the choice of the preferred alternative, reasoned explanation. Well, it's new, so we don't want to do that one, so we'll just pick the SPUI. Because we know what that is. That's traditional. We know what SPUI does. That's their reasoned explanation. Took them 7 years to get to that reason. 7 years to say, gosh, it's new, we're just going to go with the SPUI. Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ, which is the federal agency that oversees NEPA, has issued guidance on how to evaluate alternatives in a competent, comprehensive, and objective manner. This guidance can be found in the CEQ's regulations implementing NEPA and in the CEQ's NEPA procedural handbook. Here are some specific things that the agency must do when evaluating alternatives. Identify all reasonable alternatives, including the no action alternative. Gather information about the environmental impacts of each alternative. Analyze the environmental impacts of each alternative in a thorough and unbiased manner. Compare the environmental impacts of each alternative to the purpose and need of the project. What? Really? Compare the environmental impacts of each alternative to the purpose and need of the project. Huh. Well, we don't do that either. FDOT can't be bothered to do that. The purpose and need for FDOT just doesn't really mean anything. Provide a reasoned explanation for the choice of the preferred alternative. Because it's what we know. It's what we've always done. Okay. Good enough. The agency must also consider the following factors when evaluating alternatives. The environmental impacts of each alternative. Well, that wasn't considered. The economic impacts of each alternative. Well, that wasn't really considered either. I mean, it's great for Newport Richey. It's great for Port Richey. It's great for Starkey Ranch. It's great for Commissioner Starkey's husband. So, okay. I guess they did consider the economic impacts of the alternatives. I mean, it sucks for everybody on 41, but again, do we really have to consider the economic impacts on the peasantry? Do the peasants qualify? I guess not. The social impacts of each alternative. Okay. The political feasibility of each alternative. Well, there you go. There you go. They can hang their hat on that. The SPUI is politically feasible because the corrupt MPO board politicians want it. So I guess that's the one that that's the one that they have to adhere to. The agency must also consider the views of the public when evaluating alternatives. I guess. Do they? Do they really? I don't think they do. The agency must solicit public comments on the alternatives. Yeah, they do that. They'll ask for your comments and then they'll ignore them. And must consider the public's comments in the decision-making process. They consider them to the extent that they think about how they can ignore them. You know, what excuses can they offer that will appear as though they actually considered them? If the agency fails to evaluate alternatives in a competent, comprehensive, and objective manner, it could be subject to legal challenge. Yeah, I guess. You know, if you have millions of dollars to throw at the court cases, if you're willing to take the risk that if you lose suing the state over this, that you end up having to pay their legal fees, it's a huge gamble. The agency may be required to prepare a new environmental impact statement to modify the project's design. Well, preparing a new environmental impact statement, that doesn't bother them at all. That's almost a reward, because then they keep digging that hole and filling it back in again. Dig that hole, fill it in, dig that hole. That's very fulfilling for them to be able to do that and not actually do anything. So that's not, yeah, the taxpayers are the ones who get screwed, and the public, because of what in essence means that the DOT has non-performed on their project. But then modify the project's design. Okay. Right. I guess that happens.